There are moments in history when a single page, forgotten beneath dust and silence, can awaken something the world was never meant to remember. Welcome to the Unveiled Scroll, a place where shadows of the past whisper their most unsettling secrets. If you are drawn to forgotten mysteries and hidden chapters of history, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this story with those who dare to listen. Tonight we open a tale rarely spoken aloud, a story scholars dismiss and archivists refuse to catalog, a chronicle known only in fragments as the Ashan record, according to scattered references found in abandoned libraries and sealed imperial registries. The Ashan record was not simply a manuscript, but a warning disguised as history. It begins in the winter of 1691, in a decaying wing of an imperial archive hidden beneath a coastal fortress somewhere along the northern edge of Europe. A place where salt winds scraped against stone towers, and the sea groaned like an old witness to forgotten crimes. Within that fortress worked a man named Elias Verne, a royal archivist, known among scholars for two qualities that rarely coexist: ruthless curiosity and relentless patience. Verne believed history was never truly lost, only hidden by those who feared its consequences. For decades he catalogued treaties, battlefield reports, royal correspondences, and confessions written in trembling ink by men who had once ruled nations. Yet none of these documents unsettled him the way a certain reference did one quiet evening, when he discovered a ledger entry dated nearly 80 years earlier. The entry was only a single line long, written in faded iron gall ink, but its meaning was enough to disturb even a seasoned archivist. It read simply: Chronicle sealed by imperial decree. Access forbidden. Witnesses dismissed. Memory to be buried. Most scholars would have ignored it, assuming it referred to political scandal or some forgotten court intrigue. But Verne was not most scholars. The phrasing was wrong, the tone too absolute, as though the writer had feared not embarrassment but revelation. Over the following months, Verne searched every corridor of the archive, comparing catalog numbers, mapping forgotten storage vaults, and examining architectural plans of the fortress itself. Eventually, his search revealed something disturbing: a sealed chamber not recorded in any official index. Its entrance had been hidden behind rows of collapsed shelves and bricked passageways, as though someone long ago had tried to erase its very existence. On a storm-ridden night in late October, with thunder shaking the towers and waves striking the fortress walls like war drums, Elias Verne pried open the chamber door. Inside he found a single iron-bound chest resting beneath layers of dust so thick it seemed untouched for generations. The lock had corroded into a fragile relic, and when Verne forced it open, the metal snapped with a sound that echoed through the corridor like a distant gunshot. Within the chest lay a manuscript wrapped in dark cloth, its pages yellowed yet preserved with unnatural care. The title etched across the first page read simply "The Ashan Record," followed by a phrase that no historian had ever documented before. But the Empire chose to forget. At first, Verne believed he had uncovered a suppressed political history, perhaps evidence of betrayal or war crimes erased by victorious rulers. But as he began to read the opening pages, the archivist realized the Chronicle was something far stranger. It described not merely events, but a chain of decisions made by an empire gripped by fear. Decisions that would lead to a silence so deliberate that entire towns vanished from maps and official histories alike. And as Verne turned the first fragile pages beneath the flickering lantern light, he could not yet know that by opening this chronicle he had already stepped into a story that historians once agreed must never be told again. As Elias Verne continued reading beneath the trembling glow of his lantern, the language of the chronicle revealed itself slowly, like a painting emerging from darkness stroke by stroke. The Ashan record did not begin with kings or battles, but with a small settlement, whose name had been carefully scratched away from the page, leaving only the description of its place along a gray northern coastline where forests pressed against cliffs and the sea remained cold even in summer. According to the manuscript, the settlement prospered quietly for generations. Its people, fishermen, masons, and scribes, who served a distant empire that rarely remembered them except when taxes were due. Yet the chronicle insisted that something began to change in the year 1608, when travelers reported a strange phenomenon along the shoreline after a violent storm scattered fragments of black stone across the beaches. At first, the villagers believed the stones were simply remnants of a shipwreck or volcanic debris carried by currents from distant lands, but the stones were not shaped by nature. Each fragment bore faint markings, symbols that resembled no alphabet known to imperial scholars. Children discovered that when the stones were arranged together, the symbols seemed to align into patterns that shifted depending on how the light struck their surfaces. Fishermen carried them home as curiosities, and soon they appeared in windowsills, hearths, and chapel steps throughout the settlement. The Ashen Record described how the first disturbances began weeks later. Livestock refused to approach houses where the stones were kept. The tide along the coast began behaving strangely, retreating farther than usual before returning with sudden violence. And most unsettling of all were the dreams reported by villagers who had handled the fragments directly. These dreams, recorded by a traveling cleric who happened to visit the settlement, shared eerie similarities. Each dreamer described walking through a silent city of towers made from the same black stone, a city standing beside an ocean that reflected no sky. The Chronicle does not claim these visions were supernatural, yet the imperial court clearly took them seriously. Mont, an official survey expedition, arrived under the command of Captain Adrien Moreau, a naval officer known for his strict loyalty to imperial authority. Moreau's orders, preserved within the manuscript, were simple. Document the phenomenon, collect the stones, and determine whether the situation posed any threat to the stability of nearby provinces. At first, the captain treated the assignment with mild annoyance, considering it little more than rural superstition. But the Ashen Record includes excerpts from his private reports, and these documents reveal a growing unease within the expedition. Moreau observed that compasses behaved erratically near the shoreline where the fragments had appeared. Several sailors reported hearing faint, rhythmic sounds beneath the cliffs at night, as though waves were striking hollow chambers hidden within the rock. Yet the most troubling discovery came during the excavation of a large stone, partially buried in the sand near the harbor. When the soldiers uncovered it completely, they realized it was not merely a fragment but part of a much larger structure extending beneath the coastline itself. The exposed surface revealed carvings far more complex than those found on the smaller pieces carried into the village. Spiraling patterns formed shapes that resembled maps, or perhaps diagrams, though no scholar in Moreau's party could decipher them. According to the Chronicle, it was at this moment the expedition made a decision that would echo through the hidden pages of imperial history. Rather than immediately reporting the discovery, Captain Moreau ordered the excavation to continue in secrecy. What he and his men uncovered beneath that silent shore would soon force the Empire to confront a truth so unsettling that the only solution, as later written in the Ashen Record, was not to explain it, but to erase every trace that it had ever existed. What Captain Adrien Moreau and his men uncovered beneath the cold northern sand was not the ruin of a ship, nor the foundation of any structure built by human hands. As the excavation continued under the dim light of lanterns and guarded secrecy, the soldiers revealed a surface that curved downward into the earth like the outer wall of an immense buried chamber. The black stone was smooth yet ancient, its carvings untouched by erosion, as though time itself had passed cautiously around it. The Ashen Record describes how the symbols across the surface appeared to change subtly when observed for long periods, a phenomenon dismissed at first as exhaustion among the workers. Yet the deeper they dug, the clearer the truth became. The structure beneath the shoreline was vast. Tunnels extended beneath the cliffs. Chambers opened beneath layers of stone older than any fortress the Empire had ever raised. The carvings were not decorations, but sequences, repeating patterns that seemed to form instructions or warnings. One of the imperial scholars traveling with the expedition, a linguist named Thomas Elderin, spent nights studying the symbols by candlelight. According to his surviving notes preserved in the Chronicle, Halderin believed the markings were neither a language nor a code in the traditional sense. Instead, they resembled a system of memory, a way of recording events without relying on words. Each pattern appeared to represent movements, alignments, cycles that echoed the rhythm of tides and stars. It was during these studies that the expedition discovered the chamber entrance. Beneath a slab of stone revealed by the tide's retreat, soldiers uncovered a narrow passage descending into darkness. When Moreau and a small team entered with lanterns, they found themselves standing within a corridor carved with the same spiraling patterns that covered the outer structure. The air inside was cold and unmoving, carrying a faint scent of mineral dust and something older, something that felt less like decay and more like long-sealed silence. The Ashen Record recounts that at the corridor's end stood a circular chamber whose ceiling curved like the inside of a dome. At its center rested a single monolith rising from the floor, carved entirely from the same black stone scattered across the village shore. Unlike the fragments above ground, this monolith bore a continuous sequence of symbols arranged in vertical bands that spiraled upward toward the ceiling when lantern light touched the carvings. Shadows moved across the chamber walls, in patterns so precise that several members of the expedition believed the shapes formed images. According to Holdren's notes, those images resembled coastlines and celestial paths, maps not of land, but of time. It was then that the first true fear entered Captain Morrow's reports. The monolith did not simply display symbols. It reacted to movement within the chamber. As the lantern flames flickered, the spiraling carvings appeared to shift subtly, aligning themselves as if responding to the presence of observers. Haldern concluded that the structure might be a device designed to record cycles far beyond human lifetimes. Yet the Chronicle reveals an even darker possibility, whispered among the soldiers who guarded the site. Some believed the chamber was not meant to record time but to measure something approaching it from the sea. The Ashen Record does not confirm this theory directly, but it preserves a chilling line written in Captain Morrow's final field report, before communication with the Imperial Court became urgent and fearful. The line reads simply, "The structure was not buried to preserve it. It was buried to hide the moment it was built to witness." Within days of that report reaching the capital, Imperial officials ordered the site sealed and the surrounding settlement evacuated under strict secrecy. What the Empire feared was not merely the existence of the ancient structure, but the possibility that its silent monolith was counting toward a moment no living historian would survive to explain. And as Elias Verne continued reading these forbidden pages centuries later, the Archivist began to realize that the Empire's decision to erase the site from history had not been an act of caution alone, but an act of desperate delay. By the time Elias Verne reached the final pages of the Ashen Record, the lantern beside him had burned so low that the chamber walls trembled with restless shadows. It felt as if the fortress itself were listening to the words he had uncovered. The Chronicle described the Empire's response with a tone colder than any battlefield report Verne had ever catalogued. Within weeks of Captain Adrien Morrow's final dispatch, a sealed decree left the imperial capital under the authority of the Privy Council. Its instructions were absolute. The coastal settlement was to be evacuated quietly under the pretense of a maritime quarantine. Every resident would be relocated inland, their records altered, their village erased from maps and maritime charts. The excavation site beneath the cliffs was to be sealed with stone and reinforced by a garrison whose orders were not to study the structure further, but to ensure that no future expedition ever uncovered it again. The Ashen Record explains that this decision was not made out of superstition but cold, hard calculation. Imperial astronomers had studied the diagrams transcribed from the monolith by Thomas Hull, and their interpretation produced a conclusion so unsettling that it was recorded only once before being locked inside the very Chronicle. Verne now held, according to those scholars, the spiraling patterns within the chamber did indeed map cycles, but not merely the cycles of stars. They appeared to mark intervals between vast disturbances along the ocean floor, massive shifts beneath the crust of the world that occurred with a rhythm measured not in years but in centuries. The structure beneath the shoreline, they concluded, may have been built by an unknown civilization that understood these cycles long before the Empire itself existed. Whether it was meant as a warning, a marker, or a device to measure an approaching catastrophe remained impossible to determine from the fragmented data. Yet the calculations suggested something more troubling still. The final pattern recorded on the monolith did not represent an event long past. It pointed toward a convergence expected within a narrow span of decades during the early 18th century. The Ashen Record never describes the exact nature of that convergence, only the sheer terror it inspired among those who read the astronomer's report. Faced with a phenomenon they could neither confirm nor prevent, the Empire chose silence. They chose to forget. The chamber was sealed, the tunnels collapsed, and the coastline reinforced until the sea reclaimed the place entirely, washing away any trace of what had been found. Captain Morrow's expedition was disbanded, its surviving members reassigned to distant provinces where their knowledge would slowly fade into obscurity, their stories dismissed as tall tales. Thomas Aldrin, the man who first deciphered the patterns, vanished from the historical record only months later, his research confiscated and sealed away from prying eyes. And finally, the Chronicle itself. This very manuscript, resting in Verne's trembling hands, was hidden within the fortress archive under the strict command that no historian should ever open it again. The last entry in the Ashen Record was not written by a scholar or an official, but by the archivist who sealed the chest decades earlier. His handwriting was hurried, the ink uneven, as though the words had been written during a private moment of profound doubt. The entry read that history often survives through memory, but some histories survive only through warning. If the monolith's calculations were correct, he wrote, the Empire had not prevented what it feared. It had only ensured that when the moment arrived, no one alive would remember why the sea had once been watched so carefully. When Elias Verne finally closed the manuscript, the storm beyond the fortress had grown quiet. The waves no longer struck the stone walls with the same fury they had hours before. For a long time, the Archivist remained seated beside the open chest, considering the Empire's choice to bury this chapter of history beneath a suffocating blanket of silence. And somewhere out beyond the dark horizon of that northern sea, the tides continued their ancient rhythm, indifferent to the forgotten warnings carved in black stone centuries earlier. Thank you for listening to this hidden chronicle, here on the Unveiled Scroll. If this story stirred your curiosity about the secrets history tries to hide, remember to like, subscribe, and share this video with fellow seekers of forgotten truths. Until our next journey into the shadows of the past, keep your eyes on the pages history tried to close, because sometimes the most dangerous stories are the ones the world chose to forget.